Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm adding another addition to my Climbing the Ladder series today, which means I'll be breaking down one of my recent games. I hope you guys are enjoying these as much as I am, and I'm going to continue doing them. This was an interesting game I'm going to show you guys that I played yesterday. Um, I made some good moves and some good strategies in this game, and I also made some mistakes. And as the title implies, there were some missed opportunities on my part, which I will break down for you guys. So let's just go ahead and get started here. I was playing with the white pieces, and I started with e4, e5. This is the standard Roy Lopez opening for white. And my opponent played d6, and I play c3. I am preparing d4 and attacking in the center. And my opponent plays bishop to d7, getting rid of that pin on the knight. And I just continue with my plan, attacking in the center with d4. And my opponent plays a6 here. And, typically you don't want to trade bishops for knights, especially in this opening with white. This light squared bishop is a very important piece, so you don't want to just give him away for no reason. And on top of that, since this bishop is now on d7 here, I'm not even going to mess up his pawn structure by making this trade. So there's no real reason to make that trade at this time. So I just play bishop back to a4. And my opponent plays knight to f6. He's now putting pressure on my e4 pawn here in the middle. I don't want to defend going backwards with the bishop. Obviously, these two pawns are not in a position to defend as either. So instead, I'm just going to play knight to d2, defending the square, also defending the knight over here as well. And now my opponent plays b5. So I'm just going to play bishop back to b3. And a lot of times, this is kind of the diagonal that you kind of want to be on anyway with the light squared bishop as white. So you're getting your opponent to push these pawns forward, possibly overextending, depending on how the game goes, and you get this nice open file with your bishop here in this opening. And now my opponent plays bishop to g4. And this can be kind of an annoying pin. Obviously, my knight's pinned here, but you'll notice that he made this move before I actually castled my king. So really here, I don't mind pushing my pawns forward. So I just play h3, and if he was to move back, I would have played g4 here, because I'm not that concerned with protecting my king yet. I can castle on the queen side a little bit later in the game if I want to, but I would have continued harassing his pieces. And he's got this knight here too, so I can really start putting some pressure on these pieces with my pawns. But instead of moving backwards with the bishop, he just takes my knight here. And this is probably my first mistake. I obviously noticed that this knight was defending this pawn here. So my thought was I don't really want to take with the knight. I took with the queen instead. Now, let's see what happens if we just go ahead and take with the knight. So my opponent possibly could have taken this pawn thinking that it was undefended, but this is one reason why the bishop's so great here in this particular opening. Because after that knight move, you can play bishop to d5. And now you're attacking two undefended knights, and there's no way for these knights to defend each other with any moves either. So you're essentially trading one of your pawns for one of your opponent's knights, which is an excellent trade. And this is fairly common. I mean, not common, but this is definitely something that happens in the Roy Lopez opening. I've been here before in this particular setup, and it just so happens that in this game I missed it. I wasn't really focusing, I guess, or whatever. So I instead took with the queen. And you'll notice now that this knight's gone, I only have one defender of this pawn, which is kind of an issue. But my opponent doesn't realize it either, so no harm, no foul. He prepares to castle here, and I actually go ahead and castle. And then he follows suit. And at this point now I realize, hey, I better do something about this center area because he's threatening to really win a pawn here or something along those lines. So I was thinking about playing d5, pushing this knight away. I guess the knight could go probably here. But one of the reasons I didn't want to do that is because I didn't really want to block my bishop, the diagonal for my bishop. I like what I've got going on here. So instead of making that pawn move and pushing it one forward, I just trade. So we both trade pawns in the center, and I play rook to d1, basically x-raying this queen here. Now my opponent plays bishop to d6, and I play c4, which is kind of a strange looking move. What I was kind of hoping was that he would take with the pawn, and then I'd be able to jump up with my knight, threatening this, this piece here, and really getting my knight in action, and also opening up this diagonal here as well. But of course, there's another issue with this move, and my opponent exploits it right away. He plays knight to d4. So before I made this pawn push, my pawn was guarding this square, which is important because you don't really want your opponent's knights to really get some good squares to come to. And when he jumps here, he's attacking the queen, so that's something you gotta respect, obviously. The other thing to keep in mind is he's got this move as well. If you're not careful with the queen, he can check the king and possibly win some more material. So you got to be careful with these knight pushes. So I just moved my queen to e3. Obviously, got to move the queen, and he takes my bishop. Now, I was happy he took my bishop because this is a very troublesome knight here on d4. You'll notice both my pawns are already pushed past the point of actually attacking the square. And my bishop here, my dark squared bishop, really is in no position to really threaten this knight at the moment at all. So it could have proved pretty difficult for me to get rid of this guy. Now, in this particular position, I was already thinking about playing knight to f3, kind of dislodging him, because this knight is just too good. He's putting too much pressure on a lot of these squares right around my own territory here. So I was really trying to get rid of him, and happy to see that he wanted to trade right away. So I recaptured, and again, my knight's guarding this bishop here that's under attack. So I didn't take with the knight, I took with my queen instead. And it is move 17, and I've moved my queen 4 times in the opening already. So not ideal, but you know what? It's okay. Okay, now my opponent plays h6. I think he's trying to stop my bishop from coming in and pinning his knight later on in the game. Okay, so I play knight to f3. He moves his rook to the e file, and I play b3. Now, it's kind of shoring up the position a bit here, but the main purpose, I wanted to put my bishop on one of these 2 squares. Here's not an option, here's not an option for the bishop. This move, e3, is looking pretty good, but one of the things I was thinking of was maybe putting him on a3 and doing some shenanigans here. So if he makes some random move and I play bishop to a3, obviously he can't really take it because then he's hanging his queen. So obviously there's ways for black to defend. He can maybe go here or something, but you know, it's an interesting place to put your bishop. So let's see. I played b3, and he preemptively plays queen to e7. I think, seeing what my idea was. Now this move is out of the question because if you play it now, well, you're just hanging a bishop. So instead of going to a3, I just take my bishop to b2. It's a decent square. I've got somewhat of a diagonal here, and my bishop is, capable of coming to different locations from this spot. Okay, so before he makes this move, this is, in my eyes, a very even position. I don't really think anybody has much of an advantage here up to this point. But the next move my opponent makes, c5, I think this was a mistake. I don't really know the purpose of this move. Sorry. The problem with the move is this bishop now that he's got on d6 is just in a very defensive position, a very passive position. He's not really looking down any of these diagonals anymore. And it's just kind of locking his own pieces out and making them kind of passive and weak. So I don't think this is a good move. Again, I don't know what he was doing. Maybe trying to open up something for his queen? Not sure. But I like to see that. So I play knight to h4. And what I'm thinking of is, well, the obvious threat is knight to f5 here, attacking the bishop and the queen. Like I just said, this bishop is not a very good piece right now. And you'll also notice that these pawns here that are blocking him, there's no way for these pawns to really move at the moment. So this bishop could be locked here for a long time. And as you'll see, this bishop is pretty immobile for the rest of the game. that he's around. So that's the obvious threat, but my main goal was actually to start having my opponent push some pawns in front of his king. Something that I was thinking I could exploit with some attacks and some tactics and things like that a little bit later on. And there's another great point to this move, and I missed it, but I will show you in a second after my opponent plays g6. Now this is what I was expecting to do. He doesn't want me to jump here. And I had another plan in mind, but you'll notice there is a pin in this position, and there's a solid move, an obvious move to make here that's just going to win a pawn for white and kind of ruin or damage the structure in front of black's king. Now that pin is right here. This pawn is pinned, and this pawn, the move here would be taking this pawn on g6 with my knight, because this pawn can't move, he can't retake because of this pin on my opponent's king. But as I just mentioned, I did not see that, so I continued with my plan, which was playing bishop to c1. And what I was hoping was for my opponent to play g5. And, that's a great move for me, because now this is really allowing me to jump to f5. And similar to before with my opponent's knight, I think on d4, my opponent's pawns are pushed too far forward, and they can't challenge this knight anymore. And there's no good way for my opponent to deal with this knight. Notice he doesn't have a light square bishop anymore on the board. He could possibly reroute his knight after a series of moves, but very difficult for him. And not only that, but I'm already attacking this bishop here, and I would be bringing another attacker here. So this is what I'm hoping. But my opponent plays a better move. He just moves the king forward, but I'm still feeling confident about what's going on here. You'll notice a lot of my opponent's pieces now are tied down defending some of his pawns and other pieces. This king, is now glued to this pawn for the time being. This queen is glued at the moment to this bishop, and you'll also notice my queen is attacking the pawn on a6. So he can't really bring his rook into the game either without doing something else first as well. So I'm feeling pretty confident here, and I feel like my pieces are positioned a little better than my opponent. So, okay, after he moves the king forward, I play bishop to e3. I'm very intent on keeping this threat, this attack going, and I'm also attacking this square as well. So I think just putting my bishop in a slightly better position here. Okay, my opponent plays a5, and I think he realized that he wanted to move his rook somewhere, and he needed to get his pawn out of the way of my queen's attack before he does so. So I play rook to d3, and I'm preparing to basically double up the rooks on the d file. You'll notice only the queen is guarding so far. Okay, and he plays this rook all the way over to b8. And after this move, I saw what my opponent was planning. So I'm expecting him to come to b4, obviously attacking the queen, and this rook's defended. And I noticed that if I move my queen out of the way, say I do a random move, if I move my queen out of the way, this pawn's actually hanging. And not only that, but after he captures the pawn, my knight's also hanging. So to guard against that eventuality that I saw, I played f3 here, because I actually want him to play this move, and I'll show you why. So he plays rook to b4, and I bring my queen back to c1, and I was thinking I might get away with this move because I'm creating a battery here, and I'm threatening capturing this pawn with check on h6, but I felt that this move kind of just looks like a defensive move, like, oh, I'm moving my queen out of the way, like, don't pay attention to what this is actually setting up. So I thought I had a chance here to kind of pull one over on my opponent, but he did notice, and he played knight back to g8, defending this square. So good job by my opponent. And now I play queen to d2. So I'm keeping this battery alive. I'm locking these pieces for the moment into guarding the square, and I'm also doubling this attack on this file. So again, I feel like I'm slowly but surely winning this positional game at the moment. And one thing I forgot to notice, after he goes back with the knight, he's actually opening up an attack on my undefended knight. But so after he takes this knight, you'll notice that he's also giving up defense of his bishop. And it's true that this bishop wasn't very good to begin with, and notice this bishop never moved. But the thing is, we're trading a piece for a piece here, but I think the reason this works so much better for me, for white in this position, is because this is opening up a nice file for my pieces that are already kind of threatening a lot of places along the board. This queen is all alone out here. His pieces, black's pieces aren't really in any position at the moment to really combine in any sort of attack, and this queen can't really go anywhere else to threaten anything else on this side of the board. Square is obviously covered. This square is covered. Obviously can't go here. So there's a lot less freedom and attacking chances, I think, for black still in this position. So let's see what happens. Okay, so he plays c4. I just go ahead and trade those pieces. And now I played rook to d7. And this was another mistake by me. The best move here was actually playing queen to d5. And I saw this move, but... So the reason this is so great, okay, you're threatening taking this pawn with check. You're also threatening this undefended rook. So there's just a lot of attacks going on. It's basically continuing up with the pressure, continuing the pressure that I was building earlier. And I saw this move, but for some reason, what I wanted to do was set up a potential mating opportunity first. So I played rook to d7. Not really seeing this attack here, which jumping up the knight, attacking the rook, forcing me to make a move. And you'll notice this battery's still in line, but this queen is now guarding. So I didn't think this would work. But believe it or not, there is a crazy tactic here in this position that the engine found, which involves a sacrifice. I gave away a lot of the details of this already by just what I had previously said, but if you want, you can pause the video here, see if you can figure out a way for white to sacrifice some material, but to win back even more material. And by more material, I'm talking about this queen here on h4. See if there's a way that we can win that. Okay, so I'll give you guys a little bit of time if you want to think about it. Okay, so the answer is, even though this queen is guarding the square, is sacrificing the bishop here on h6 with check. So this is the point. I'm very certain that if I had played this move, which I did not see, my opponent would have immediately taken on h6. That's it's a very obvious common sense move here. Now, this seems fine for black. There's obviously tension here, but the point is, after black recaptures the queen, you can hit your opponent with check here with the rook. And what this does is this forces the king to give up his defense of the queen on h6. So obviously the king can't go here. The king can go on the back rank, let's say, but the best move by far, I think, for black is just taking the rook. But notice that hangs the queen. And now white is up a queen. He's infiltrated the territory of black, and this rook isn't even doing anything yet. So that is a major tactical move there that, to be honest, I'm not upset I didn't see, because that's a pretty I don't want to say complex, but it's a difficult tactic to see. It's interesting. I don't know if I'll see it again next time in a similar position, but I am happy that the engine caught that. So, but of course I didn't make that sacrifice. So instead I just played my rook back to b7. I was probably thinking, I believe I was thinking maybe doubling the rooks on this file, just kind of moving my rook to a safe square here. Obviously, these squares are all cut off, so just retreating. My opponent plays the rook all the way back to c8. Not sure what his plan was here either. I guess he's trying to reconnect the rooks again, perhaps. But I connect my rooks, double up my rooks on the B file. And now my opponent moves his rook, attacking my queen. So I just go ahead and play queen to b2. And now, not only am I tripling my pieces on this file, which seems a little intimidating, but the other thing I'm doing is threatening this pawn. So my opponent does notice this. He plays his knight backwards to d7, defending this pawn from my queen's attack. And also obviously this knight's defended, but now I start piling up pressure on this knight with this advantage that I think I've built up over the course of the game. So I play rook to d1. So now I've got an extra attacker on here. And there really aren't that many options for black. So black actually goes ahead and plays queen to e7. Now I kind of like this because yeah, you're adding another attacker, defender, I should say, but this knight is pinned now. Because if this knight moves anywhere, you're losing your queen. So I see this and I put even more pressure on, because notice at this point black can no longer add defenders to this knight. He cannot go this way for obvious reasons, because my rook will just take it. And there's really no other piece he can use to get into this action here. So I played queen to d2. Now I've got 3 attackers. And this was a good move. It was a slight mistake. The reason it's a slight mistake is because there's a better way of attacking the knight here, and that's actually by playing queen to b5. The reason queen to b5 is better is because you'll notice now I have 3 attackers, but my opponent's rook is lined up with my queen. It's a small thing in the course of this game, but it is something to note that b5 would have been a better move. It's also threatening the pawn as well if this queen ever moves out of the way, let's say, for whatever reason. So I went ahead and played d2, and now my opponent, I think, realized, okay, there's no way for me to defend this piece. So he thought for a while, I think in a minute and a half or a minute and 45 seconds, and he plays knight to c5, which is not a good move. I think he should have simply just given up the piece. I think that was the best he could have done here. But unfortunately, by playing this knight move, he's losing even more material, because he opens up his queen for attack, okay? So I take the queen. Notice my rook is not under attack here, okay? So he takes my queen, but I just take his rook back. So we traded queens, except I won an entire rook in the process. So instead of winning a knight, I ended up winning a rook. And not only that, but now this knight is also under attack as well, so that gives me even more tempo and time in the game. So he plays knight back, and it's, it looks too appetizing. I gotta put my second rook on the 7th rank. It looks especially good because his king's already on the 7th rank. And, it was just it was an obvious kind of move for me to make there. So my opponent, noticing that this guy's under attack, he plays his rook all the way back to f8, defending the square. And here, this comes to the second pin of the day, and final pin of the day, as far as I know, that I missed, because I play rook to a7, but there is a better move. So, again, if you want, pause the video. Again, kind of gave it away, but see if you can find another pin in this situation that you can use to exploit to win even more material for white. Okay, so the move is rook captures the knight on e6. Here's the pin. So this pawn cannot capture my rook because of the pin on my opponent's king there. So again, something I missed, but nonetheless, this is still... I'm in a pretty dominating position at this point, but these are things that I feel like, I should be seeing and capitalizing on. So I think at this point my opponent maybe noticed the pin, because he actually moved his king out of the way, defending this knight here. Unfortunately, you'll remember this king was glued to g7 for a very important reason before. And once he moves away, I just go ahead and take the pawn on h6. And it looks like I'm just winning a pawn, and yes, very important because my opponent's final remaining rook is under attack, but there's something even more important here, and that's this king has very few places to go now. This square is attacked by my pawn, and these 2 squares are covered by my bishop. So he's dangerously close to hanging checkmate in one, I guess, or in several moves in this position. So he only had one move here that saved basically the game for him, and allowed him to prolong the game. And he didn't make it. He played rook to h8, and you'll notice it's a pretty straightforward move. Your rook's under attack. You want to move your rook out of the way, and now he's attacking my bishop. Sounds good, but this rook was also pinned to a piece. And I don't want to say pinned because I've used that word too many times today, but he's glued to f8 because he's got to defend the square because of my doubled rooks on this file. So as soon as he moves his rook to the corner, I hit him with rook to f7, and this is actually checkmate because his king can't go anywhere along this file. these squares are obviously taken up by his pieces, and like I mentioned before, my pawn and my bishop combine here to prevent this king from escaping the jaws of this checkmate. So I thought this was an interesting game. The middle game was interesting, and I think I played a good middle game. I think this move was not great, and some of my moves here were a little bit inaccurate. I could have used my advantage a little bit better, but I did build up the advantage over a period of time, basically positionally throughout the game, and because of my opponent's passive pieces, I was able to generate basically a game-winning attack here that forced my opponent to blunder the game. So, and of course there are a couple of missed pins that I have to work on. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.